Welcome to the Level Up Artist Podcast. We're your hosts, Adriana May and
Jackie Sanders. We are two art professionals sharing forward the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journeys.
we talk to artists, leaders, and art professionals to demystify the creative process and discover new ways to succeed as a career-minded artist.
If you find value in these conversations, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you will be notified when we drop a new episode every Tuesday.
So, as artists and business owners, we all inevitably go through phases. It's almost like a roller coaster where we feel we have more momentum and opportunities versus times that it's technically the opposite of that. So, depending where you are in your career, those phases, especially early on, can trigger some insecurities like self-doubt, imposter syndrome, and the list goes on and go on and on. And that's when it's really crucial to kind of take a step back and recognize the ebbs and flows that are part of the creative process and of the entrepreneur journey. And technically, they can even be on opposite sides of the wave, but we'll definitely talk about more about that. Especially too, it's when we're going through those changes, how do we maintain a positive mindset and kind of like what strategies we can attempt or what things we can try, especially if it's on the side of the wave that we don't want it to be.
Yes, and I think especially during those slower seasons, and whether it's our creative practice, whether it's in our art business, that key mindset is the biggest thing. And that's, I think, the first step that maybe we all recognize or get triggered by is those elements of self-doubt, the negativity that creep into our mind. So we just want to encourage everyone, if you are feeling one of those slow seasons, or if you remember one of those slow seasons, to remember when you have one coming up, that just because things are slow doesn't mean that that is a negative thing. Because rest is very, very important. Talking to myself here as well, because that has always been, I feel like, a struggle for me with that athlete mindset of, if you're not actively working towards something, then you're falling behind, was a mindset that I'm still trying to dismantle to this day. But realizing that in some phases of your creative practice, rest is really the best thing that you can do for yourself. It allows yourself to experiment and explore and play in your creative practice. And it also allows yourself to be more open to opportunities, whether business opportunities, networking opportunities, really dive into relationships with other people during those slow periods that you don't have when things are busy and super scheduled out and you're stressed with deadlines, right? So those phases of rest can be a huge energy boost, and don't have to be a negative thing. Plus, if you're able to keep your mindset in that positive rest space, you can also have your mindset be focused on growth-oriented perspective. So it can lead to unexpected breakthroughs creatively with your work, and maybe your eyes are more wide open to networking opportunities, to business opportunities that might have been right in front of you all along. But if you're so focused on this deadline and that deadline, and I need to finish up this series and I have to make this art product, and the whole to-do list of day-to-day things in our personal lives, right? Your mind maybe close off to seeing a very obvious lens or opportunity that's right in front of you that you can only see when you slow down and rest and take that time to have your eyes open. So it's not always a negative thing. It can be an amazing opportunity too.
Yeah, and I'd like to think of it kind of like, when you are actively working on a piece, right? Especially if it's not planned out, you're just kind of
Mhm.
at the easel, so to speak, or whatever your medium is. How sometimes if you just keep going at it, you're just not distant enough from it to see
Mhm.
or to figure out what's wrong with it. And then all it takes is for you to literally go away, come back the next morning with fresh eyes. And then you're able to see, oh, I need to change this here. This composition's off here. Like this line needs to be a little stronger, or this color needs to be brighter. I feel like a lot of times that's what those ebbs and flows when the wave is on the bottom side of things. That's one of the things it lets you do. You're not going 500 miles an hour, go, go, go. Now you can actually take a break, look back, a little less emotional, and be like, okay, what worked, what didn't work, and what can I do better for the next wave? I think it's like a super important part of that rest period that you were describing. I think another good thing that this is for is actually to revisit your actual goals. So those slow periods and moment of calms, that's when you can make sure you're moving in the right direction. If you've heard us talk before on the podcast, thank you. One thing you'll hear us talk about every once in a while is the idea of moving towards the mountain or away from the mountain. So at the top of this hypothetical mountain, you would have the 3 or 4 biggest initiatives that you're working towards in your business. It might be your 3 or 4 biggest income streams or just initiatives or goals that you have. And then the slow periods is when you can look back at however, whatever time period you want to look at, say the previous few months or the previous year, and say, okay, of all the different things that I found myself doing, teaching summer camp and doing this workshop and doing these commissions and doing this commercial, I don't know, whatever that looks like for you, which of those things brought me closer to my goal and which ones detoured me a little bit. And it's okay to detour, but it's good to have that clear view of where you are. You know, if you were to place yourself on the map, are you getting a little bit closer? Because that's honestly at the end of the day what matters the most is you getting a little bit closer. The speed of it actually doesn't really matter. um and then using this quiet time of low pressure will also help you clarify what your goals are, what your vision is for your art. If there are new things that you're interested in developing that perhaps you put on the back burner before because you just didn't have the time for it or the experience, or the interest, honestly. I know you're like, ooh, I'm curious about exploring this. This is like a great time to do that, to network with others, to get information on, hey, I want to add this to my mountain. How do I do that in the most effective way? Um, minimizing minimizing frustrations, and maximizing enjoyment during the journey, of course. And then the big caution that we would want to share about this is, yes, when it's slow, and again, depending what stage of your art career is how much of an impulse you're going to feel about this. Super, super, super important not to be reactive. If you're reactive, you're way more likely to just jerk that steering wheel, so to speak, and try to pivot a little too fast without giving time for other initiatives you've been working on to give yield fruit, let's just call it that way. So if something new that you had done in the past year was to try to sell your fine art prints through a third party website, let's just say, and you just started that, you didn't even give it enough time or enough effort, let's be honest, didn't put enough effort into it, and it didn't yield the results that you wanted, it doesn't mean it's time to scrap it and move on and that didn't work and that's the end of that. It might be, okay, do I need to tweak that or do I need to reevaluate whether it still makes sense for me or not to pursue that? But it can be really tempting, especially if things are feeling a little slow. Oh, these things didn't work. I'm either going to scrap them or worse, I'm not going to scrap them and I'm gonna add these 500 other things on top because I'm throwing all this spaghetti at the wall. One of these things will work. I'll make keychains. I will make prints. I will make t-shirts. I will make shoes. I will make, you know what I mean? Like, and that's not necessarily the answer. Sometimes it is, but maybe not everything at once. It would be very easy to get distracted by adding all these new things, trying to patch a hole instead of figuring out, is there even a hole in this at all, or it just hasn't grown yet, whatever you had planted. Yeah, a lot of metaphors in there, so I hope you're getting
Yeah.
with me, but essentially no reactionary, plan it out, but no reactionary moves. When things are slow, don't freak out, just take your time to reevaluate your goals and make sure you're still in alignment with whatever that mountain looks like for you.
Yeah. And I think a key point to that too is that, like you mentioned, like it does make sense for certain phases to strategically pivot, right? But you
Mhm.
want to make sure that the decision that you're making is based off of real flushed out data in terms of, yes, maybe it's sales. Maybe if your goal is to sell X amount and you're not hitting that, but also reevaluating, okay, well, what are the things that I'm doing to set myself up for success for the goal? Because it may not be the art prints that are the issue. It may be the marketing effort for those art prints that's the issue. So it's not the product itself. And I think a lot of the time that is a hard thing that artists can wrap their brain around. Of course, I come from the marketing world for my day job, and Adriana, you have a degree in business and marketing. And so we think a lot about that. But yes, we have these creative products, we have these paintings, we have these pieces that we are very closely connected with because they are our creative expression. But ultimately, when it comes to sales, when it comes to networking with collectors, a lot of it is based in those relatively boring business principles. It comes down to marketing, it comes down to networking, like relationships. And so I think that's another key thing to think about is when you're reevaluating your goals during those slow periods, also recognizing that the slow periods are a great time to take action on doing those right things in your business and in your marketing to help those goals come to life. So especially from a marketing standpoint, you may do things like restructuring your website, updating it with new inventory. Maybe you want to redesign your marketing materials because your old business card doesn't necessarily reflect the artwork that you make now because you designed them 4 years ago when maybe your style looked different. Maybe you want to launch that newsletter that during the holiday season or during your prime market season, you were too busy to really start. And now that you have a lull in events, this is the perfect time to do it. Even from a verbiage standpoint, maybe you want to reevaluate your artist statement, update your bio, because now you have more experience under your belt, to making sure that how you are presenting yourself to your audience, to future collectors, to opportunities is up to date. And taking the time to look for artist calls, fill out applications so that then once those timelines come, you have things coming in the top of the funnel. That's the biggest thing, is really focusing on those. Okay, if it's slow right now, what are the processes that you have in place, and how can those be refreshed so that your future self will be set up for success? I always think about, like, what projects or tasks will my future self be glad that I prioritize? Like, once I go have studio events, once we do, maybe you do art markets, you're saying, I'm so glad I already have my newsletter templates already designed. I already have a thank you newsletter that I customize to each of my markets. So when I collect emails, it becomes a 20-minute process, not a 3-hour process starting from scratch, right? So investing in future things, especially even artwork wise, having that time to experiment, having that time to develop a new series, constantly thinking about what projects will your future self be glad that you prioritize now when you had the time, because when you don't have the time, you won't have the time.
Yeah, and this got me thinking too, like, I feel like a lot of times those lulls and slower times we're talking about, I think a popular one that applies to almost every artist that I know is January. The
Yeah.
holidays are, it's too cold to do outdoor work for, depending where you're located, of course. And people have spent money during the holidays, so they're not necessarily buying from you or asking you for projects, or they're redoing their budgets for the year, different corporations and whatnot. So it might seem slow from a lot of different fronts. And I think it's a great time, like you said, to do some of those administrative tasks that you probably put off when things are busy. Um, but that could lead to, like you said, things you're going to be grateful for later on. And one that I want to make sure we don't forget to say is raise your prices, people. Raise your prices. Especially January. It's slow. This is a great time to look at your pricing, see how things sold, and do you need to bump it up? If you haven't bumped it up, and it's been, especially if it's been a few years. So that's definitely it.
Yeah.
But ultimately, some of the biggest takeaways with what we're discussing today is Look, slow periods happen to everyone. Like, I know several artists that make more than six figures, and sometimes they have a lull where it's 3 months and they had nothing going on. And are they freaking out? No, not really. They're just like, it's part of the cycle. They also are organized enough, which is another reason that the slow period works out in your favor. They're organized enough that they're not freaking out because they know there's another project coming down the pipeline that they already started working on 6 months ago. They just know it's just about a matter of time before they start on it and get paid and things like that. So definitely slow periods happen to everyone, regardless of how successful they may seem online. Everybody's got them. Embrace the rest. Try to shift your mindset. Revisit your goals. Raise your prices. Sorry, I had to say that again, and take action on the right type of things. Focus on the things at the top of that funnel, newsletter, marketing network, etc. Focus on those things that you know will help move the needle and get you a little bit closer to your metaphorical mountain of goals. And just go for it. You got this. So thank you so much.
Yep, and so that's a wrap on today's episode. As always, our blog will be linked in today's show notes where you can find episode notes and links to our other podcast episodes.
And if you want to stay connected with us in between episodes, share your feedback, or have a question you would like for us to answer on the podcast, you can reach us through social media. I'm at May Art across all platforms.
And I'm at J Sanders Studio on all platforms. And if you want to follow the podcast, we are at Level Up Artists on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.